That camaraderie and the things that you build in the Marine Corps is that you're willing to sacrifice your life for another Marine. So we, as we say in the Marine Corps, we fight for each other.
Every day he wakes up Marine, and every night he goes to sleep Marine. That's very much a part of who he is, and it's very much a part of how he thinks about things and how he addresses issues and problems in life, and I'm okay with that. That's okay. Sometimes we'll need to remind him that the civilian world is not the Marine Corps, and there are some distinct differences that need a little bit more tolerance, perhaps.
Well, I entered the Marine Corps, went to boot camp in San Diego, California on February 25th, 1986. At that time, boot camp, I graduated sometime in June and was assigned as an intelligence operations person, collecting and doing intelligence. I got there in '87 and we were deploying 4 months later as part of an expeditionary unit to the Middle East. So we are the rapid deployment force. We're about a unit of 2,200 Marines that are the tip of the spear that go in an emergency, or one of our main missions was evacuations of Americans in certain places. We really believed in what we were doing. One of the things personally that I liked is that I could make a difference. We're here to help people and do the right thing, and get scared, sure. But that was part of the process of doing what not many other people are willing to do.
What I do know is that it is not uncommon for individuals who've been in the service, who have had traumatic experiences, or who have struggled with some of the incidences that happen while they are in service, they may go on to develop problem gambling issues. I have worked with veterans for over 16 years now, understanding how difficult it is for people who have problem gambling. It's important to understand that that is not an easy road. Encouraging people to continue on that road, even with the bumps and the setbacks that happen, is incredibly helpful and powerful for people who are struggling to overcome this issue.
I think I started gambling recreationally probably around 1990. I was stationed in Camp Pendleton, California, and Las Vegas was close by. It became out of control when I knew that I was going to Vegas by myself. That's when it really started being out of control. I did steal a couple other credit cards from friends that trusted me. One of the things that I recognize now, and as I've looked back years, is those of us that gamble prey on those that are closest to us, that trust us. And I think that's one of the most heinous things that we do as gamblers, is we say that, you know, we love people, which we truly do, which is very hard for people to believe, because we're doing actions that are not consistent with loving someone who does that.
Just seeing your journey over the years and your recovery and where you're at now compared to where you were at then, it just is such a powerful statement.
When you first met me, I had no hope. Looking back at the person I was 20 years ago, I would have never imagined or never thought it was possible to be where I am today.
How do you see the kind of roots of where your gambling started as well as the roots of what attracted you to the military.
Well, gambling in the military in general, for me, it connected in numerous ways. First of all, it was initially starting with the camaraderie of gambling with fellow Marines. It grew to the competition. We loved the competition. We loved the excitement. It was something that we shared and was something we all enjoyed.
The competitiveness, the wanting, that sense of belonging, and the relationship ties that happen around gambling, and that sense that this is also my comfort, this will be my solution. The progression, that this is fun. It's a way to decompress from the intensity of my job in the military.
It was our escape, it was my escape, and I think that became even a deeper, probably more problematic bond, was that the escape of what gambling gave us that we couldn't get anywhere else.
How did this become more problematic for you while you were in the military? What tipped the balance?
So I started then delving into doing some things that were illegal and wrong. And I knew they were wrong the whole time, but I could always justify what I was doing because I was going to be making it right when I got that big win. Gambling was more important to me than breathing at that time.
Your values and your values for joining the Marine Corps were to be of service, to protect people, you know, especially people that you care about. Were you aware that you were really hurting people, and how did you connect that with the gambling and undoing all of that?
Every person that I love or loved and that I used or lied to, I truly did love. I truly did care for those people. Yet most people would look at your behavior and say, that's certainly not loving, or that's certainly not being respectful, that's certainly not doing those things. And I think the reason why I could always justify that insane behavior is because I could make it right. I could always make it right with a big win. So my security clearance was pulled, and then I wasn't able to do my job. And after further investigation, I was actually charges were filed in the Marine Corps against me. You know, all felony kind of charges that translated into the Uniform Code of Military Justice. When things got so bad and I knew I was going to be eventually court-martialed, facing some significant prison time in the military. I was in jail for about 2 years, and my appeals process was coming up for a too harsh of a sentence. They upgraded my discharge to a bad conduct discharge, vice a dishonorable discharge, and I was then put on parole. At that time, I decided, you know, do you want to live? Do I want to live? Because I have tried every possible thing while I was gambling to have a better quality of life, to survive, and it wasn't working. And so at some point I just had to say, you know what, Glenn, if you want to live this gambling, you're going to have to stop.
My experience has been veterans have difficulty admitting that they have problems or feeling as though their struggles somehow are a reflection of weakness. I encourage veterans to bring any concerns or problems that they have to counselors and therapists, folks that can help. Problem gambling is not a weakness, it's a mental health addiction.
It was very difficult, but I knew that I've tried this how many times before, and I couldn't do it by myself. And I think one of the most difficult things for any veteran or anyone in the military is to admit, I need help, that I can't do this, because it's frowned upon in the military, that any sign of weakness.
What was it that made it difficult to acknowledge that you needed help, you know, in terms of you personally, but also the ethos of being a Marine?
I didn't want to appear weak to anyone. I knew that if I would come forward, it was never even really a thought that crossed my mind that that was even an option. I never thought that I could go to my sergeant major or go to my commanding officer and lay all the cards on the table, because that would be the end of my career.
A big step for many people is understanding that the solution to the problem needs to come from your ability to see it as a mental health issue. Gambling is not the solution to the problems that gambling has created. And with our military population, I think that the tendency to want to fix the problem, and if I can just make one big win, I can make all of this right, I can solve the problem.
As you started out, beginning to acknowledge this was a problem, the consequences, how did you find the resources, or how did they find you, and what are the resources that you put together that really made recovery possible for you?
Sure. The most important thing when I was homeless in Phoenix, Arizona, was a call that I made to the VA in Cleveland about inpatient treatment. A Vietnam veteran pulled me aside when I was at the VA there and said, you know, why are you gonna do what I did? I've wasted 30 years of my life before I asked for help. You're screwed up. You got problems, and you know, you need to find help. And that person was key because, number one, it came from a fellow veteran. It didn't matter if I knew him or not. And number two, that there was hope. And so I made the calls. I reached out to the professionals who actually understood the gambling addiction. And I think that's probably the most difficult thing even today, is to have professional mental health providers within the military system understanding this addiction.
You know, I think in general, you know, we're trained that you fight, you have courage, but we're not trained to have emotional courage necessary. It's about physical, doing battle kinds of courage, maybe intellectual, but certainly physical. How did you come to understand the courage that it really took to do this emotional battle, to fight this fight of recovery?
In the military, courage can be measured. I can see what I've done and what I've not done. My emotional piece, how do you measure that? Well, I started learning to measure it by the fact of how I saw myself, how I viewed myself, and how I treated other people. And I think what I was searching for, what I finally found very early in recovery, was the gift I gave myself of peace of mind. I may not have anything. I may be living in someone else's house. I may be working at a job that I don't like, but when I went home and went to bed and didn't gamble, I had peace of mind.
I think what's really important in Glenn's story is that he kept trying to get recovery. You know, it's not something most people get all at once and once and forever. It's a process. And you try something and you get a little bit and maybe you slip back, but then you have the courage and the humility to go back, to ask for help again.
And so I went back in 2004 for my second round of treatment, went through treatment, then stayed in the domiciliary at the VA for 6 or 7 months, did some work compensated therapy programs where I was doing minimal pay for work in the VA, mostly custodial work and things like that. And then I applied to the VA for an entry-level position as a nursing assistant, and was hired in the VA October 1st in 2006. And then in 2008, I was hired at the Erie VA for a peer specialist position, which the VA and now the outside community is really working hard on, is realizing that peers, people that have been through the shoes of other young people suffering or veterans suffering, can really be a motivating source and a piece of support for them.
What do you think took more courage for you? All the stuff you did in the Marines or being emotionally vulnerable?
Emotionally vulnerable. Yet, through trial and error, you find that, you know what, you can tell the truth and still be loved. And it's such a much better route to go, and creates and gives things that sometimes I don't even know if I'm worthy of.
Glenn and I first met as colleagues at a VA that we were both working at the time. He was a peer support specialist. I was a clinical psychologist on staff, and our relationship at the time was very collegial. We shared a lot of patient care and worked together in services to veterans.
And I was a peer specialist working on the bottom end of the totem pole, and worked with her with numerous patients, and was immediately struck by her ability and compassion for veterans.
I knew Glenn was very serious about his recovery, and he was well on his road to recovery because he was very honest, and he was open with me about some of his prior struggles. But most importantly, he was very honest and forthcoming with himself.
I think the first challenge was the fear of rejection, the fear that I wasn't good enough. What could I possibly bring to Amy's life that someone else couldn't? And that I could be good for her. You know, I was oftentimes not very good for anybody, including myself. So how could I be an asset to someone?
In my relationship with Glenn, he developed trust with me over time. I do believe that people can change. I believe that people can learn from their experiences, and that we shouldn't hold people prisoner to the mistakes that they've made in the past.
Actually, I think I knew I needed to be loved. I needed love. Not that I knew how to get it, but I knew that my life by myself, the goals and things that I've made, was not just that. There was more to life.
I fell in love with him for the person that he is, not the person that he was. And I think that that was very puzzling to him in some ways, given his history and some of the things that had happened when he had been honest and had shared his experiences with people.
Because I had failed for so long in my relationships that I knew honesty was going to be the bar of building trust. And once Amy and I began to be a very serious relationship, that was a difficult one for me. I was imperfect at that because I loved her, I didn't want to lose her, and I wanted her to see me as this knight in shining armor that was perfect.
I have seen so many times where Glenn's story is so much more powerful and enriching for people to hear than what I can offer them in therapy. His example of, here's someone who has seen those same fires and managed to walk out on the other side and have a good life and move on. And live in recovery and have a wonderful quality of life. There's a lot of things I think Marines in general struggle with, and it's been life-changing for me to be married to a Marine and to have the firsthand exposure, so to speak, to the level of commitment and camaraderie and compassion that Glenn has, that exemplifies Marine Corps standards.
The one thing I always had in my mind is I never wanted to hurt someone again. I didn't trust myself enough to get involved in any sort of relationship. For the first time in my life, I could kind of say, this is part of me, and I could start talking about that. And as embarrassing as it was, someone actually cared for me. And that was the key then to continue to grow. That someone could see some worth in me that I couldn't see.
It took a long time for him to be convinced that he was enough. And that I understand we all make mistakes. I'm also not perfect, and I've made mistakes. But moving forward and learning from those mistakes is the most important piece of being able to acknowledge and accept how you could do things better and to grow as a person.
I seek forgiveness for the things that I have done. It's really hard to look at myself and say, you're okay, you're doing okay. And I think that's what my partner brings me is.
His journey has helped him get to a point in life that he never thought possible. And that can be a very, very powerful message for those folks that may not be able to see that far down the road or may feel like it's helpless, hopeless.
It's important to stay involved in this, to remind myself by helping other people or doing trainings or doing whatever is that, you know what, the more people that get educated and hear my story, bring hope to other people that I'm not touching, you know, and that's why the work continues.
And it's something that I really value in him. I love very much about him. And I don't want him to change that. And he loves with his whole heart. And he feels very strongly about what's right and wrong. And he does his best to follow that. And all of those things are examples of the values that I see in Marine Corps veterans. He is my Marine, and I love him for it. Now you see why I married him. What I said.
Thank you for our first date.
I love you.